Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at RJ Julia. I'm Kristen. We're here tonight to welcome Neal Shusterman. To discuss his newest work, Gleanings. So most of you in the audience are probably familiar with the Arc of the Scythe series, and it's a particular brand of deconstructed dystopia. In this fourth book of the series, we're going to get glimpses into different timelines, origin stories, hidden secrets, and more. The man you come here to see tonight is not only the author of this critically acclaimed series, but also the Skinjacker trilogy, Downsiders, and the Unwind Dystology, which thank you for giving me the opportunity to say the word dystology. There's more than 30 titles out, so I'm not going to list them all for you here, but we have many copies of many different books here tonight, so I cannot recommend them highly enough, start to finish. With that, I want to welcome you to the Scythe and ask that you join me again in welcoming Neal Shusterman.
So, the idea for Gleanings came about after I was pretty much done with the toll, and I wasn't ready to let go of this world. I loved working in this world. I loved the stories in it. And I realized that there were so many different corners of this world that I hadn't shed light on yet. So many places that I wanted to still visit. So many backstories that I wanted to explore. And so I sat down to start writing some stories. One of them was actually one that was something that I pulled out of the toll. There was a whole sub-story, a whole subplot in the toll featuring Citra's brother. And the more when I was working on the toll, I realized that his story just didn't fit. There was no way to integrate it into the story. And so I pulled it out, and I didn't think of what I was going to do with it. I just realized I had to pull it out of the toll. As soon as I decided to do a story collection, I knew what the first story was going to be. And so I was able to really do have a lot of fun with that character and that story. There are so many different stories in here, and I got the opportunity to work with multiple authors. And I did that before when I worked on the short story collection Unbound for the Unwind Dystology. And by the way, I made up the word dystology. It doesn't really exist. But I'm waiting for it to show up in Webster's, and then I can say I created a real word that ended up in Webster's. But I decided that I wanted to work with different authors, and I contacted a number of them that I was really interested in working with. But a lot of people's schedules don't allow. Jason Reynolds I wanted to work with. He's always too busy. Nick Stone also. She was going to do a story. She was going to do a story, and then one of her books sold the series, and she was going to write the script. And she called me. She's so apologetic that she's not going to have the time because she's working on the series. And I said, no, that's great. You do your story. I was excited for her. But I did get the opportunity to work with David Yoon. And he and I came up with this fantastic story that I love about the last piece of mortal art, because that's one of the things that that I talk about in starting even with Scythe, how after humanity became immortal, art ceased to have passion. And so when was the last piece of mortal art created? And so there's a story about that. Story about the origins of Scythe Curie, which she's a favorite character, and everybody got very mad at me when for those of you who read the whole. I don't want to it's a spoiler, but yeah, I can't save all of my characters, but I did give her a backstory, and also there's a little surprise towards the end. So I think you'll be happy with that. It's hard to talk about the story, so I give you spoilers about it. But I want to do a couple of readings for you. The first thing that I want to read is actually the only story that I had very, very little to do with the collaborators. Basically, what we did is we came up with a story. They went and wrote the first draft. I gave them editorial notes. They went with the second draft, and then I took it and then did a final pass. And made the voice conform and just really rework the story. With this one, and this was my daughter's story, my daughter Joelle, she wrote a piece in verse that opens the book. And I didn't really have to do anything. I mean, this just came out of her just like this. And I was so proud of it. And I think it's a great introduction to the book, and I'd like to read it to you. It's called the first swing. Slicing through the air with effortless aplomb, the moment you take your first swing. You wield your axe like you are a master in the art of gleaning. Those before you are in awe. They cannot imagine what your next move will be. You carry yourself as balanced and poised as a performer, dancing brutally among them. The searing star of stars, your robe cascading to the earth in showers of gold. But that is not the truth. Your worth does not matter to those who now matter to you. You are truly nothing but a tiny sunspot to the eyes of others like yourself, an insignificant fleck. And as you take that first swing, they laugh at you. You try to rise above their derision, to be noticed in some small way, to find favor from the old ones who are never old, to gain respect from the young ones who have slain their own youth, to justify the arrogance that comes with the pride of being chosen. But that is not the truth either. It will be years until you come to know the truth, that those you revere are merely servants to the collective that we prune. It was their choice to let us choose all those years ago. The awed, terrified, relieved spectators, the real ones in power, the puppeteers of your actions. Standing in a perfect line before them, a cutting edge, wielding our axes, each one of us is the same as the last. We are one in all, and we are all in one, and we shall kill. Our mantra, our commandment, our duty to remind the immortal of mortality, to teach them that eternal repose may be distant, but not lost. Who are we? We are Scythes, and the weapons we wield are not by any means our friends. The devastating force of bullet, blade, and bludgeon tears us apart each day, every day, piece by piece, and leaves us with wounds that will never heal. This is what ties us to the masses, yet restrains us from being one with them. And with each new gleaning, we bleed and break anew. Yet our resolve never changes. For we are Scythes. Nothing will ever change that fact. And when it is your time to bleed, you will know. And you will learn. Thank you. The centerpiece of the collection is a story about the origins of Scythe Goddard. For those of you who read the entire series, you know a little bit about his past, that he was on the Mars colony that mysteriously had a disaster that killed everybody on the colony. And he was somehow involved. So this story goes back to him when he was a creepy teenager. And he wants to get off Mars. More than anything, he wants to go back to Earth. His parents want him to be, want him to be a miner on the planet. He's kind of like, he sees himself like Luke Skywalker, but he's more like Darth Vader. But in this part of the story, Xenocrates has come to visit the Mars colony. He's the only Scythe that's ever come there because they don't need Scythes there because they have endless ability to grow. But he comes there because he wants to visit the planet just to see what it's like, or so he says. And Carson Lusk, who is Goddard when he was younger, he finagles himself into getting the position of Xenocrates' valet while he's on the planet, hoping to maybe curry some favor with the Scythe. And so every evening they have conversations. Carson looked forward to his evening conversations. Xenocrates seemed to be an expert on every subject, and his opinions had layers and layers. It was a challenge to keep up with him, and Carson enjoyed a challenge. His insights into the human condition gave Carson plenty to think about. Immortality is a double-edged sword, Xenocrates said one night. All the more reason to carry one. He laughed at his own joke. With such gusto, Carson had to laugh as well. Then Xenocrates lowered his voice. You say you dislike it here. Would you wish that this colony had never existed? Carson sensed there was resonance to the question such that a simple yes or no would be insufficient. I think that the human race was born on Earth and so was meant to stay on Earth. But the Thunderhead chose to establish this colony, Xenocrates said, playing devil's advocate in this debate. And the Thunderhead is incapable of error, is it not? It's not an error, Carson told him. It was a choice. Then he paused to consider it. I would have chosen differently. Xenocrates seemed more than satisfied with Carson's response. Then he leaned in and whispered, as if the walls themselves had ears. Perhaps we still can. Each day the Underscythe was lavished with whatever excess the colony had to throw at him. Food and drink, gifts he couldn't possibly take back to Earth, and a mind-numbing amount of photo opportunities. Through all of it, Carson was there by Xenocrates' side, although mercifully he was excluded from the photos. I endure all this not for my own sake, he told Carson, but for the people of Mars. It's not every day that they have someone to impress. So, are you impressed? Carson asked him. Xenocrates dismissed the thought with his signature wave and a sniff. That's immaterial. What matters is that I played the part. Although, as a Scythe, he didn't have to play any part. All the more reason to think that all this was part of some long game. The man had hinted as much to Carson, even suggesting that Carson could be a part of it. Carson would have to play his cards right, and if he did, his cards might never include replacing drill bits on the King of Spades again. That was one of the drills that his parents owned. After 2 weeks, Xenocrates had seen all there was to see, and had met everyone he wished to meet in the colony. Carson had not had time for any schoolwork while attending to the Scythe, and the Scythe was aware enough to order his teachers to give him perfect grades for any of his missed work. His math teacher had blustered, but in the face of a Scythe's decree, it was as thin as the Martian air. All things are possible, Xenocrates told the teacher when she raised the objections. Then he walked away with nothing further said. In the end, Carson was given an A. It proved Xenocrates right. All things were possible when one had enough power to bend the tenets of mathematics itself to one's whim. And so Carson bided his time, waiting for Xenocrates to flick a little bit of that power in his direction. If you truly wish for a bright and glorious future on Earth, I can make that happen for you, Xenocrates told him. But you'll need to earn it. It was at one of their evening teas in front of the fake fireplace. Carson's heart seized for a long beat when the offer was made, but he tried not to show it. He didn't know whether he was excited or terrified, perhaps a bit of both. What do you need me to do? Xenocrates cleared his throat, took a sip of tea, then took another. Carson could tell that the words he was about to speak were well considered, but even so, the man needed time to consider them some more. Finally, he spoke. I would ask you to perform a sacred service for humanity, something that would put the Thunderhead in its place, and in so doing, preserve our way of life. Carson still had no idea what the Underscythe was getting at. Preserving our way of life sounded like a tall order for a kid on Mars, because after all, that's all he was, an unknown in the grand scheme of things, in spite of his dreams of becoming something much more. But then, an unknown quantity might be just what the Underscythe was looking for. There needs to be an event on Mars, Xenocrates continued. The kind of event that neither the human race nor the Thunderhead will ever forget. I need someone to create such an event. Carson took a slow, deep breath. I can do that, he said. Thank you. So as you can tell, I had a lot of fun writing these stories. And I would love to open it up to questions. I'd like to spend the rest of the time answering any questions that you have about the series, about Gleanings, about any other books, about writing in general. Yes, right there.
Who was your favorite character in the beginning, and then who was your favorite at the end?
My favorite character, that's a really good question. My favorite character at the beginning was Scythe, and he still is a favorite character, but he was a little bit eclipsed by the Thunderhead. The Thunderhead is my favorite character, perhaps the favorite character that I've ever created. I love the Thunderhead. I wish the Thunderhead were real. It's benevolent AI that wants nothing but the best for us and is wiser than us and knows what's best for us, even if we don't. And mourns over the fact that it can't control, it can't change human nature, that it will never change our decisions, but it will try to make things the way that's best for us. Another question. Yes.
Where did you get the idea to come up with this book series?
The entire series came from two different places. First, it was I wanted to do, and I love the way you put it. Where did she go? You hiding back there? I love the way that you put it when you said what would you call it? Dystopian.
Histology.
No.
Deconstructed.
Deconstructed to so yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. That was kind of what I was trying to do. I was trying to take the idea of dystopia and flip it, because dystopian stories are all about the world gone wrong, and we've seen so many dystopian stories. I wanted to see the opposite. What about a story about the world gone right? Not utopian, because utopia doesn't exist, but the idea of a world in which we achieve all the things that we want to achieve without, none of our worst case scenarios, but all of our best case scenarios. AI is the benevolent force that we wish it would be. We're able to conquer all of these terrible diseases, so we don't have to go around wearing masks and worry about COVID. Where there is no more poverty, where there's no more hunger, where the world is sustainable. All of those things that we hope for, what happens when we achieve them? And I realized that when we do, there's going to be consequences to getting the things we want. So I wanted to think about those consequences, and I started researching what we were really trying to achieve. And the more research I did, the more Google rabbit holes I got sent down, and a lot of them ended up pointing toward life extension and projects that are out there to try to stop the aging process. And we're getting very close. It's gonna one of these days it's just gonna pop up on your news feed, and then once it happens, that's it. I mean, the human race is technically immortal. We can live forever. So who gets to live forever? Well, then it could become very dystopian, couldn't it? Because then it could only be the rich and all of that. Again, the idea was, no, I'm not going to take it in a dystopian direction. Equality everywhere. Everybody gets the equal chance to live forever. But then we end up with overpopulation. I mean, that's the first big thing that happens, is that if we've stolen death from nature, we're left holding it. People are still going to have to die. Otherwise, the world becomes overpopulated. So in this world that is as undystopian as I could make it, how do we choose who lives and who dies? So I started making a list of all the possibilities I could think of. Everything I came up with was dystopian. The computers decide. No, because then we're afraid of the computers. The government decides. No, that's like the worst idea ever. And so then I thought, well, in a perfect world, the Jedi would decide. Right. The Jedi of death. What would the Jedi of death be like? These honorable figures that everybody respected, that everybody trusted to make this decision. And people would fear them, but people would also love them because they were the best of the best, the most honorable, the most enlightened. And so that is the model for Scythe Faraday and for Scythe Curie and for all the good Scythes. But when you have that much power, there's bound to be some bad eggs that get in there. And so I started to explore the character of Scythe Goddard and all the people that he started drawing to him. But the story, of course, is told mostly through the point of view of Citra and Rowan, because I wanted to have two teen protagonists, and I wanted it evenly divided between male and female. So I worked on making sure that the story told from both of their points of view. Now that's the story about where the book initially came from. That's not going to sit up there. But there's more to it than that. And some of you who've heard me speak before have heard this, but my first presentation talking about Scythe was at a conference, and I had all my talking points ready. I mean, I was ready to tell that story and everything about where it came from. The moderator at the panel I was on didn't ask where the story came from. The moderator asked what was going on in my life when I came up with this story, which I hadn't considered. And so I had to sort of go back in time and think of exactly when I came up with the story, and I had this epiphany. The year before I came up with the idea for Scythe, my mom had a series of strokes that left her in a locked-in state. She was unable to eat, unable to speak, basically unable to move. All she could do was blink her eyes. Sometimes it seemed like she would blink in response to things we said. Other times, no, we had no way of knowing, if she was still there. I took her into my home on hospice, and she was there for almost a year. And finally, the hospice doctor sat my father and I down one day and said, maybe it's time you think about letting her go. It was a very difficult decision, but we knew that she would not want to go on like this. And so I had to turn off the feeding tube. And the doctor said that she would pass in about a week peacefully. But my mom was a very strong woman. She went on for 29 days. And she died on her 79th birthday. And everybody told us how horrible this was, what a horrible thing for her to have to go through, for us to have to go through. But then I thought about that. Would it have been better if she was hit by a car? Would it have been better if she had cancer and slowly, painfully went? Would it have been better if she had Alzheimer's and lost who she was? It all sucked. There's no easy way to lose a parent, and yet it is something that we all must go through. But I want to tell you about her last day, because to this day, I still think about it and how much it means to me, how she passed. The nurse, who was there 24/7 by this point, woke my father and I up at around 5 a.m. and said that it's almost time. They can tell within minutes of when somebody's about to pass. So we went downstairs. I took my mother's right hand. My father took her left hand. The nurse had the stethoscope to her heart. And we both told her that it's okay to go, that we're going to be okay, that we love her. And finally, the nurse said, she's gone. Now, I don't know about you, but leaving this world while being held by the two people you love most in the world is not the worst way to go. And the next story that I wrote was a story about people whose job it was to end life with compassion. Wow, I never even made that connection until I was asked that question. And now I understood why I felt compelled to tell the story. As writers, we feel compelled to tell stories, but sometimes we don't even know why. This story just screams at us. It's saying this is the story that has to be written. I realized in that moment that that's why I wrote Scythe, because I was working through what happened with my mom, and I reread it. All of those chapters that are talking about Scythe Faraday and the compassion that he has when he gleans people, that was all just me working through what happened with my mom. And I think that bit of reality that got into the story is part of what makes it work. And so that's really where it came from. Now, I knew from the very beginning, I knew where it was going. I knew where the toll was ultimately going to end, but I didn't know how it was going to get there. I didn't know all the characters that we were going to meet along the way, but I knew where it was ultimately going to go. And it was an adventure, making that, following that path and seeing all the different twists and turns that it made until finally ending up where it did. And so that's pretty much the story of where the entire series came from. Yes,
Mr. Shusterman, I'm a middle school reading teacher.
you deserve the applause.
Oh my God. I can't. Your books have been a point of immense bonding between me and my students, from the Arc of the Scythe, Unwind, all the Challenger Deep has broke us down and built us back up.
Thank you for saying.
Oh gosh, this is the best day of my life. I wanted to ask you, you've traveled the world, you've visited so many schools, you've seen all of these readers, all of these people who absolutely positively love your books. In fact, one of my coworkers, you went to her school to promote Challenger Deep, and she and I have bonded quite a bit in this new school where I'm teaching over the wonderful experience that you gave her. What has it been like being able to travel the world in all these different venues to see the people who love your books, and how has that fed into your continual process?
It is an honor and a blessing to be able to do that. To travel. I mean, I just got back from Europe, and I was speaking in towns that I had never even heard of in the Netherlands, with a crowd like this of people who've read the book, and it's so wonderful to know that that the words are getting out there, the ideas are getting out there, that people are being moved by this. You know, when you're sitting alone in a room and you're struggling over a phrase and wondering whether or not anything that you do has any meaning, and then you come and you speak to people who have read the books and it means something to them. It's very heartening, and it's very validating. So, and it makes me want to write more. You know, I find that when I'm on tour, I write more than any other time, because I am so jazzed to get back to writing after meeting with everybody. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yes.
What was the idea for the patron store?
Say that one more time.
What was the idea for the patron store?
The patron store. I wanted each of the Scythes to choose somebody from history to name themselves after. And it needed to be someone who contributed positively to society. And so I have a big, long list of possible Scythes. I haven't used all of them. There's times when people come up to me and make suggestions, and I think, oh, I never thought of that person. Okay, I add them to my list. But the idea was that since the Scythes are sort of shedding who they are when they become Scythes, I felt that they should take on a new name. And I thought it would be sort of poetic, very poetic, if they took on the names of people who helped create the civilization that brought it to where they were today. Right here.
Yeah, well, speaking of Challenger Deep, I brought that with me as it's my favorite. And I also feel like it's pretty markedly different from some of your other work. So I was kind of wondering, what's the difference between writing a piece like that compared to a YA dystopian sci-fi sort of thing?
It's very different. So Challenger Deep was very unique in even how I approached it. Challenger Deep was inspired by my eldest son's experiences with mental illness. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder when he was 15 and was hospitalized, and it was a very, very difficult time for him and for our whole family. At one point, he said, "It's like I'm at the bottom of the ocean screaming and nobody can hear me." And I knew that I had to write a story about what it felt like to be so lost in your own mind that it's as if you're in the deepest place in the world and don't know how to get back. Well, the deepest place in the world is Challenger Deep, the bottom of Mariana's Trench. And so I decided to use that as a metaphor for mental illness. And writing the story, I decided I was not going to write it linearly. I always write linearly. I was just going to, as things came to me, just paragraphs, moments, I would just write it down and I would throw it into a box. And I did that for over a period of about 4 years. And then I tried to piece it all together. And so it was a very different process. And when I was finished with it, I had no idea if it even worked. But I gave it to my editor, and I felt just as possible, my editor could come back and say, "Neal, this is just a self-indulgent piece of garbage." Or it could be something that was good. I had no idea. And she wrote back to me in an email the next day, and she said, "Neal, this is your masterpiece." And I was so relieved. And that, of course, went on to win the National Book Award. And of all my books to win that award, the one that was closest to my heart did. And for us, for our family, it was part of the healing process, because Brendan came with me on tour and he spoke openly about what he had been through. By this point, he was doing fine. He had, hadn't had an episode for several years by the time we went on the road talking about it. And he kept looking forward to, to going out on the road and signing, because he did the artwork in the book. And it just became a very positive thing. It was a way of taking a very dark time in his life and in our family's life, and using it to try to spotlight on a subject that needed more light and needed discussion.
Just a comment on that, it's probably for your son, really allowed him to own the experience and take away any shame or any of those feelings that
Yes.
come along with stuff like that.
Very much so.
That's pretty good stuff.
Right there.
Do you have some ideas that you thought were great and then it just didn't turn out very well?
There are ideas that I come up with that I really think are good ideas, and then I start to develop them, and then they sort of just go away. Yeah, that happens. I have many more ideas that never see the light of day, and many times for good reasons. You know, not everyone is a gem. Some ideas sit for a really, really long time. Game changer. Sat for maybe over at least 10 years. That started because I was speaking at a school, and a student in the back of the room who was definitely a sports guy. You know, you could tell he was like big and buff and was like joking around with his friends in the back and not listening. But apparently he was listening, because he asked me, "Mr. Shusterman, how come you haven't written a sports book?" And I said, "Well, if I had a story that lent itself to being told as a sport, I'd write it." And he said, "Well, what would it be about?" And so I said, "Oh, I don't know. It would be like something I would write, you know, like maybe a football player who tackles so hard he bounces into alternate dimensions." And it got a kind of a laugh, which was the point. But that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so this idea stuck in my head, and I realized, okay, this is not a story. This is just a gimmick. You know, it's a gimmick, but maybe there's a way of turning that gimmick into a story, but I didn't know how. Because I mean, we've seen shows about alternate dimensions, you know, we've seen Quantum Leap, we've seen all that stuff. I didn't want to just, you know, do something like that. It wasn't until years later that I started to think about the social situations in this country, and started to think about, a character who just did not get different social situations. They were living a very sort of myopic, sheltered life, and, you know, didn't understand things like what it meant to be Black in America. You know, didn't understand LGBTQ plus, didn't understand any of the issues revolving around that. And so I thought, well, what if I take this character and bounce him into universes where he has to face all of these different social things and really see it from a new perspective? And then I got really excited about Game Changer, because it wasn't just a gimmick anymore. It was taking a character and getting them to see cultural perspectives that they had never seen before, which is what a lot of kids need. And so I thought that it was a very powerful idea and a very scary idea. And when I get scared by an idea, that's when I know that I need to write it. Because I mean, basically what I did was I took all of these hot button issues and I just jammed a red hot poker in them. I just, you know, just got dealt with all of these issues, and I was worried the entire time that I was going to get a lot of flack for it, that I wasn't going to be sensitive enough. So I really vetted the story. I gave it to Nick Stone to read. I gave it to Laurie Hall Sanderson, because there's a whole section that deals with a woman in an abusive relationship, and she wrote a lot about that. And so I got a lot of comments back that helped me shape the story to make sure that I was hitting everything right. And it's a book that I'm very proud of. It might have been, I would say that was the hardest book that I ever wrote, because I took such great pains to get it right. And my editor told me, no matter what you do, you're going to get flack for this book, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be out there. And she was right. I got flack from both the left and the right. So basically I pissed everybody off equally, which was fun. But then I'll get those emails from kids who've read it, who really connect with the character. And so, you know, that's who it's written for. Right here.
So, in the arc of a Scythe, which character did you want to kill off the most?
Which character did I want to kill off the most in Arc of a Scythe? Well, you know, sometimes death isn't good enough for a character. So sometimes you have, you know, I mean, the obvious answer is Goddard. I mean, that's the obvious answer, but you know, I knew that I was going to kill him off in the first book, but in Scythe, as you know, characters don't necessarily die forever. You know, they can be brought back in various different ways. So I knew that Goddard was going to continue to be the antagonist in the story, because you can't get rid of the bad guy in the first story and just, you know, I mean, Star Wars, Darth Vader, tumbles off into space, he's coming back. Yeah, but I would definitely say it would be Goddard, but again, that's the easy answer. They tell you which characters are the hardest to kill, but then it would be a spoiler for those who've never read.
I thought that the Thunderhead book was one of the most unique perspectives of a book that I've ever read.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of like transition from Scythe and having, all these different characters' perspectives to just be like telling the story of the Thunderhead, or how you came up with that idea?
Well, the Thunderhead's perspectives really comes out in the little vignettes from Thunderhead's point of view between the chapters. And I usually write those, I did that with Scythe. I write a bunch of those first so that I know sort of the philosophical underpinnings of the story before writing in the action. And the Thunderhead, as I was writing Scythe, I just became increasingly interested in the Thunderhead. As a matter of fact, I mean, I didn't know the second book was going to be called Thunderhead until I was about halfway through Scythe, and that's when I realized I really need to get into the head of this entity, basically this artificial god that we had created, who is almost all powerful and yet incredibly humble and wants nothing but to help humanity, but is unable to save us from ourselves. So, and it's lonely, I mean, the character, the Thunderhead is almost a bit of a tragic character by the end. But I really wanted to explore that, and it was fun. It was fun writing from the Thunderhead's point of view. One of my favorite things that the Thunderhead says is that it wonders if it's ever going to figure out how to go backward in time and to be able to time travel. And then it thinks, if I ever become able to time travel, and there's a 50-50 chance that I actually am God, because it could go back to the beginning of time and create the universe. And it's just that I just love that, that thought process that it went through, or that I went through. So many times the characters feel like their own thing, and I'm just sort of just telling their story, and they exist independent from me. Yes.
Did COVID have any impact on writing these stories? Oh no.
I was done with the toll. I was actually on tour with the toll when I need a drink. Wait.
You have water behind your
Thank
books.
you. Just give me 1 second.
I know.
Which vibes? Which vibes?
I was done with it. I was on tour with the toll when the pandemic hit. I was actually in the last 2 weeks of the tour, and the publisher called me and said, tour is ending today, March 12th. Tomorrow you're going home, North Texas. And of course, like everybody else, I thought, okay, I'll be back on tour in 2 weeks. Yeah, it played an important part in writing wait a second. You'll have to excuse me because I am jet lagged. I did just get back from Europe yesterday morning. So let me regather my thoughts. Game Changer. I was writing Game Changer during the pandemic, and I had to try to write a story that was going to come out in a post-pandemic world where we've all been through this world experience. And I didn't know what the new normal would be. I didn't know how to write for a post-pandemic world when we were in the middle of the pandemic. And so I had to figure out, I had to sort of just project, the character in one of the worlds, he has a grandfather who died of COVID. And so I sort of put that into the story. In the opening lines, anybody have a copy of Game Changer?
I got you.
In the opening page of Game Changer, I sort of give a nod to it. I'll just read the opening page. You're not going to believe me, You'll say I've lost my mind or that I've suffered one too many concussions, or maybe you'll convince yourself that I'm conning you and that you're the butt of some elaborate practical joke. That's okay. Believe whatever you want if it helps you sleep. That's what we do, isn't it? Build ourselves a comfy web of reality like busy little spiders and cling to it so we can get through the worst of days. We've had plenty of troubled days, haven't we? All of us. The ground shifts and the world changes and we go tumbling. It can happen in the time it takes for a traveler to step off an international flight and sneeze, or the time it takes for a man with a crushed windpipe to stop breathing. I've seen all that just like you, but I've known other things. The kind of world-bending events that can't be tracked by the news or by scientists. Changes that no one else on earth will ever know. So I sort of give, I give a hint to, to the George Floyd murder. I give a hint to COVID in there, but without saying it, directly. But when you read that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know from the first page that this is a story in which that already happened. This is, this is part of the post-COVID world. And I felt that was important to do that with that story. Yes.
So I was wondering, I was recently like making Full Tilt, and I was wondering like what the idea was behind that.
The idea behind Full Tilt. Full Tilt was one of my earlier novels, and I had gone to Six Flags. I had gone to Six Flags Magic Mountain in Southern California on the most crowded day of the year, and couldn't get on practically any of the, every single ride had this, 2 hours from this point. And so we found one roller coaster that had no line because it was kind of in a hidden place. And so we rode it over and over. But on the way home that night, my imagination, as it does, started running away. And I thought, well, why didn't anybody see that roller coaster? What if every amusement park had that one roller coaster that nobody saw? Maybe it's the one roller coaster that's there only for the people who've been on every thrill, and no thrill is good enough. Then they get to ride the ultimate roller coaster. What would that be? So I wrote a short story called Riding the Raptor. And basically it's a roller coaster that never ends. Once you get on that roller coaster, you give over your soul to the roller coaster and you never come back. I thought that was such an interesting idea. I didn't want to leave it as just one ride. So I thought, well, what if it's an entire amusement park? And on every single ride, you have to face your own worst fears. And the only way to escape the park is to ride 7 of your worst fears, because 7's always a good number, right? 7 of your worst fears. And the main character realizes that no one has ever achieved that. Anyone who's ever entered this amusement park, they've been trapped there. So this amusement park is basically hell. And the only way out is to face your 7 deepest fears. So that became Full Tilt. And, when I talk about Challenger Deep, one of the things I always say is that I felt like in order to write Challenger Deep, everything that I wrote before Challenger Deep was practice leading to Challenger Deep. Dealing with the surreal nature of Full Tilt really helped me when I started to deal with surreal nature of writing Challenger Deep. So it was not a prequel, but a precursor to Challenger Deep. Yes.
In Art of the Scythe, you have a lot of those reasons that are like experimental, like census and I forget the other one. But how did you decide on that idea? And then how did you decide like what the specific idea you wanted?
It was putting myself in the point of view of the Thunderhead, really. I thought that the Thunderhead didn't just want the stagnant world. The Thunderhead wanted to have ways of creating social change and have social experiments that were positive ones that people could experience and they could choose. You could choose to live in a land where everybody has communal dreams. You could choose to live in a land where everybody has some sort of body modification like wings or gills or something like that. Nobody was forced to do these things, but people could choose these different social structures. And Texas, I thought, well, Texas is known for being very, its own thing. And I thought, well, what if Texas was the Thunderhead's experiment in anarchy, benevolent anarchy? The idea of having no rules. What happens when there are no rules? Do people move towards positive things and negative things? And ultimately, it ended up being a little bit of both. And so I got to explore that, and I had some fun with that in the stories and also in Gleanings. I mean, there's a story called Perchance to Glean, which is an experience in the dream world of the raw shelf zone of Antarctica. The only way that you can glean, the Scythes can glean, is in dreams in that land. So if you're gleaned in your dream, then when you wake up, you have to report to that site to actually be gleaned. But the Scythes, because it's a dream world, it's like there's no boundaries to what the Scythes can do. I mean, they can fly, they can turn into animals, they can do anything you can do in a dream. And so I co-wrote that with Michelle Nolden, who I've written a number of stories with, and that was just a fun one to write. That was just a feast for our imagination.
Time for about one more.
There's one way back there.
That's you.
I was wondering, the Thunderhead is one of my favorite characters as well, and I hope for it in 2024. But wondering if there were any specific philosophies or cultures, or how you were crafting a character of the Thunderhead. What do you think influenced you in the Thunderhead's personality?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a specific answer to that. I just pulled from what I imagined this entity would be. And I mean, it came from, I guess, all of my thoughts on what a benevolent, moral creature or entity would be to rule the world, to be so good at ruling the world that it didn't steal power, but people realized that it deserved to be the entity that was as it calls itself, because it's humble, the steward of the planet. We take one more?
Yeah, take one more. Let's do
One
it.
more. Let's see. Okay, right back there.
Are you writing right now?
Perfect question to end on. Yes, I am. I'm working on a new series, and I was sitting upstairs a lot of the day today writing this series. It's going to come out next November, and it's a pandemic story. But as I'm sure you know from the things that I've written, it's not the pandemic story you think it is. It's not about the pandemic that happened. It's about the next pandemic. And something interesting in the next pandemic is that people get this, and the death toll and the mortality rate is very similar to COVID. But the one thing that's different is that when you have it and you recover from it, suddenly all of the things that were problems in your life are no longer problems. That empty feeling that you had inside is gone. If you suffer from depression, you no longer suffer from depression. Suddenly you're happy. Suddenly you're fulfilled. Suddenly all those wants and needs and all those things you felt you needed in your life, you no longer need, because you are content. And once the rumor starts spreading that people are actually coming out of this feeling whole, feeling complete, feeling better than they ever felt, people start wanting to catch it. But the thing is, we live in a society that is fueled by our unhappiness. You have to have this skin cream because this skin cream is going to make you feel better. You have to buy this car because you need this car. The old one's no good anymore. You have to have the status of this new car. What about politicians? Vote for me because your life is miserable and I'm going to make it less miserable. Suddenly, when you're content, you don't need the car. You don't need all of these products. You don't need that politician anymore. Well, now the government and corporations and basically the entire mechanics of society start to fall apart and realize that we need to keep people unhappy. And so it's sort of an anti-pandemic, and it's called All Better Now.
Oh my God.
And it's the first of a trilogy. So I'm actively working on that one, and I'm really enjoying it, and I think you guys will too.